This is the third part of our lesson on finding angles with sine and cosine law. We just finished doing 2 examples of how to calculate a missing angle using cosine law, and now we're going to talk about how you would do it using sine law. So you'll notice up here, it's the exact same formula for sine law that we learned last week when we were calculating the length of a side. So with cosine law, because the cosine law formula is complicated, there is one that you can use for finding a side, and then there's a different formula that's rearranged that you can use for finding an angle. With sine law is actually pretty straightforward the way its formula works, and so we don't really need another formula. So our question here says solve for x in each of the following triangles, round your final answer to 2 decimal places. So when I'm looking at a triangle and I'm trying to decide if I want to use sine law, in order to use sine law, you need to have an angle that you know the value of and an opposite side that you also know the value of. So when I look at this triangle, I have angle x and an opposite side, but I don't know what angle x is. But I have 64 degrees and 44 meters that are right across from each other, and I know both of those numbers, which means I'm allowed to use sine law. So in order to use sine law in a triangle, you have to know at least one of those angles, and you need to know a side across from that angle as well. So I'm going to, now that I know that I'm using sine law, label my triangle the same way we labeled it for cosine. I always start with the angle being A. And when we were doing sides, we usually did the angle that was across from the side. I'm going to recommend that if you are solving for an angle, it's easier for you if you let that one be A. You can still solve it if you let this one be A, it doesn't matter, but it will be easier for you if you label A as the angle that you're looking for. So I called that A, I'm going to call this B, and this one C, and then label the opposite sides with the same letter. So this is angle A, this is side A, angle B, side B, angle C, side C. Okay, so when I'm setting up my formula, I want to start this time with the one that has what it's missing. It'll make it easier for us to solve and rearrange. It really doesn't matter, but I think it's easier if I start with A. So I'm going to do sine A over A equals, and then I have B and C. I don't know if you've noticed, I don't know anything about C. I don't know the side length. I don't know the angle. The one I do know about is B, so I'm going to do sine B over B. Okay, we're going to substitute in our numbers. So I have sine of angle A, which is x, divided by side A, which is 48. And then that equals sine of angle B, which is 64. And then that is divided by side B, which is 44. Now, when we learned how to do sine law for a side, our next step was always to cross multiply, and we can still do that here. So I'm going to cross multiply. So I'm going to do 44 times sine of x. So 44 times sine of x. And then I'm going to multiply the other side by 48. So 48 times sine of 64. Now from here, I could work this number out as a decimal, and if you want to do that, that's okay. I'm going to do one other step first before that. On this side, I have 44 times sine of x. This is not sine of 44. This is 44 times sine of x. So I can move that 44 to the other side by dividing by 44. And then I'm going to work out this part on my calculator. Now I do just want to point out before I do that, that if I come back up to this step, if I had multiplied by 48, I would get 48 times sine of 64. And if I hadn't moved the 44 to the other side, it would already have been this step. So if you're interested in saving yourself a little bit of work, you're welcome to do that. Otherwise, cross multiply, and then we're going to divide by the side. So I'm going to be left with sine x, and I am going to work this out on my calculator. So 48 times sine of 64 divided by 44 equals, I get this decimal here, so I'm going to write that whole thing down. So I have 0.980502596. That's that number. Okay, now from here, all I need to do is get rid of that sign. How do we get rid of just a sign that doesn't have a number with it? We do the inverse sign. So I'm going to do the inverse sign of both sides. So that means on my calculator, I'm going to do shift or second and then sign. If you have one where you see what you type in, just hit equals and it should give you your answer. So I have 78.66. The next number is a 7. That's going to push that up to a 7. So that's going to become 78.67. So x equals approximately 78.67, and it's an angle, so degrees. Okay, you can join me in our last video to do one more example on using sine law.